We've got tests of effort. With regard to tests of effort, there are several different tests that can be used. The two that I use are the TOMM, which is the test of memory malingering. And to emphasize my point, the VIP, which I did not bring a copy of. The other two are ones that I'm just going to briefly touch on. I've never actually used them, but all four of these are looking at someone's effort. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're malingering. Someone who's just giving forth poor effort, that needs to be evaluated unto itself. For instance, I've had a lot of people with attention deficit disorder give bad effort because they just don't care about the testing. Doesn't mean that they're malingering or faking symptoms, it just means that they. It has 15 to 20 minutes to administer, 16-year-old and over, so it's one of the few tests that I know that's normed for adolescents. It was developed in 1996, and it's got 50 items. So you tell the person you're going to show them 50 visual items one at a time, and then you show them paired items after those 50 items. So they're line drawings. Then you show them the pairs, and you say, which one did you just see? And you give them 2 trials. Now remember, this is one that we talked about if they have a floor effect. If they have if they have a chance, percent chance. So you are expecting them to get all of them correct. You're expecting them to get at least 25%, or 25 out of 50, so 50% or more correct. People who get around chance are guessing, and chance is between 20 and 30. So if you've got a score below 30, you've got someone who's just guessing. But the good thing about the TOMM, and the thing that I love a lot about it, is it's been normed on people with mild Alzheimer's and mild mental retardation. And they score between 45 and 50 every time on the second trial. So if you have someone on the second trial get below 45, they're not putting forth good effort. And you could say that with confidence. And this is a really well-researched test. It's really short. It only gives about, takes about 15 to 20 minutes to administer. The dot counting test, and actually the next test, the B test, I don't have a lot of information on. I haven't actually used them. They're both put out by WPS. Dot test. Dot test was developed by Kyle Boone and David Herzberg. It's a brief task that assesses test-taking effort in individuals 17 and over. It measures overlearned skill that is preserved in all but the most severe brain-injured individuals, and because of this, poor performance suggests lack of effort. It takes about 10 minutes to administer, and it's easily added to an assessment practice. But if you're interested in either of those, feel free to. The VIP, though, is something that about 5 years ago, the CDCR said, we want to give everyone who comes into reception the VIP and the MMP, or the MCMI. And they bought a whole bunch of VIPs and MCMIs. Was that you? And sent them to all the institutions, and that never happened. No, I'm using those bad boys. I'm like, I developed an assessment team instead and said, I'll use them. Yeah, send them on. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, sir. So the VIP, really well researched, and it's based on the TONI, which is the test of nonverbal intelligence. And it has geometric shapes, well, yeah, different shapes. And you're supposed to choose one that fits the puzzle, kind of like matrix reasoning, out of only 2. So you're guessing. And it looks at response style. The good thing about the VIP is it's response style. And it looks at irrelevant responding, invalid responding, random responding, or honest responding. Those are really the 4 areas that it looks at. It takes about 20 minutes to an hour to administer, and there are 2 sections, the verbal and nonverbal section. You can administer one or the other or both and still get a valid look at what they're doing. And what I usually do is I never administer the verbal, I only administer the nonverbal section. And the nonverbal section and the test of memory malingering are both thought to be not culture-free, they're talked about culture-free, but more culture-friendly tests, because they both rely on nonverbal processing. So that's one of the good things about both of those tests, the VIP and the TOMM. Now, the bad thing about the VIP is you shouldn't use it with someone who has intellectual disability or a learning disability. Do not use that test with that, because it's looking at response styles and it's normed on people with average IQs. So if you have someone with a learning disability, especially a nonverbal learning disability where they can't process visual stimuli, you're not going to get good measure. It also looks at defensiveness and assumptions, if someone takes on the sick role or not. So I do like the VIP. Also, one of the things, has a scoring assistant program that prints out a little report that comes with it that talks about the person's response style. I would not hang my hat on the VIP by any means, but used in conjunction with something like the TOMM, I can say with a certain degree of accuracy that the individual in front of me is either putting forth good effort or not, that their response style is honest or not. If I give the TOMM, the test of memory malingering, and the person gets 50 out of 50, I move on. But if I give the TOMM and the person gets 30 on both trials, or even less, or worse the second trial than the first trial, I might follow up with the VIP to see what their response style is like. Mr. Doe, he got 49 out of 50 wrong on the first trial, and 50 out of 50 wrong on the second trial. I've never had that happen before. I was just like, this has taken some serious effort. I mean, does he really think I'm that dumb? I don't know. But we were both having fun by the end, because I was giving him everything. He was getting 100% on all of my tests of malingering. And it's funny because his analyst didn't order any symptom validity tests. She ordered the regular WAIS and WIMS and trails and bender. I think those are the 4 tests that they required. And I called and I said, no, I need to add every symptom validity test in my arsenal right now. So it just turned into a test of malingering. Now, there's something that Pearson puts out called Advanced Clinical Solutions. How many of you guys know about Advanced Clinical Solutions? No one, okay. Advanced Clinical Solutions is kind of cool, because if you give a full WAIS and a full WIMS, or at least things from the WAIS and WIMS, enough, you send the scores in, and they run a report that has a measure for effort. So they'll do it for you. All right? Kind of cool. All right.
You mean we don't have to charge? Or?
No, you have to pay for it. Yeah. Yeah. So malingered cognitive deficits. We were talking about all the different ways to look at cognitive deficits. Well, these are the tests that you might also use. You might use the TOMM, which we've already talked about. You might use the SIMS, which has that scale. We've already talked about. You might use one of these other ones. So the Ray 15 we're going to talk about in a second, but the word memory test, medical symptom validity test, and the Victoria symptom validity test, I don't know much about. I haven't used them, but there are different tests that look at malingered cognitive deficits. This is the Ray, aka the 15-item test. It was developed in 1964 by Andre Ray, who described a screening measure designed to detect memory malingering. And it's known by a number of different names: 15-item test, the FIT test, the Ray 15, the Ray memory test, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a measure of immediate span of apprehension, aka short-term memory, where the examinee is told there's 15 different items to remember. And then they're given a sheet of paper after 10 seconds. You give them the stimulus card, and 10 seconds later you take it away, and you say, write the 15 items you just saw. 3 minutes later, for the delayed section, you give another piece of blank paper, and you have them write the 15 items they just saw. And they should get 100%. You would hope for 100%. The cutoff that was developed later on by LASIK is 9. Because when Andre Ray created this, he didn't really have a cutoff measure. It was more of a qualitative thing, but it was really well researched. LASIK came along and said that the floor should be 9 for detecting malingering. But there's been so much research on this specific test that says, oh, it's valid, oh, it's not valid, oh, it's valid for these populations, oh, it's not valid for these populations. And so it's one of the tests that I would never use just because there's so much controversy out there, and you can find a study that either supports or doesn't support it. It's also one of the tests that's most often used still. Well, guess what happened? In 1997, Griffin comes along and redesigns it. This is shareware. You can get this online. You can also get the 15-item test 2, or the Ray 2 online. I was able to find it. I'm not putting it in my slides because I don't want to be sued just in case Griffin decided to copyright it. But it is available from John Wiley and Sons. And there's enough information out there that's saying that it's a pretty good tool. In fact, it's being used with and in conjunction with the test of memory malingering, the TOMM. So what he did was redesign the 15 items to make them look a little bit different. And yeah, the studies are coming out showing that it does have a good discriminative and predictive value. So I'm going to wait. The research is still out in my brain. We'll see how, if a few more years go by and it's picked up as something. I assume if it's something that's been researched enough and has gotten enough followers, that sooner or later someone will copyright it and then I can pay for it. So I won't necessarily use this even if it is free right now. Not to say that every test out there that's published is valid or reliable, but you know, at least it comes in a fancy box. Yeah. And a lot of people do use it as a screener or in conjunction with other things. So if you did the TOMM, you did the VIP, you did the Ray, and they all say the same thing, okay. And it's not very hard. It takes like a second to give, so. Victoria Symptom Test 18 to 72, computerized scoring, measures feign and exaggerated cognitive impairment. But wait, this guy. So I told you I do these trainings. I do these trainings everywhere, and I learn as much from the audience as you guys learn from me. And last month, there was a gal in the audience from the VA, and she said that they use this test at the VA, and it's called the Morel Emotional Numbing Test for PTSD. And one of the few, maybe only tests that I know of for looking at exaggerated or feigned PTSD symptoms. I hadn't heard of it. There are some different things out there that kind of, you know, tiptoe around looking at exaggeration for PTSD, but this is the first one that I found that's actually, that I could buy, that's actually in a case. And Dr. Morel, very nice guy, sold me a copy, and he's self-published, but there are a lot of good studies out there, and the VA is using it. So I'm not actually going to go into a lot about this test, especially on camera, but needless to say, it's comprised of pictures, and the person is supposed to identify the emotions that are seen in the pictures. It suggests that it is culture-free as well, because it's a nonverbal test. It's normed for wartime traumas right now, but they're using it. Well, All I know is the VA is using it. And what I was told is that the VA is keeping it under wraps so that people who take the test don't really know what it's measuring. So hopefully I'm not destroying anything there. I'm assuming only psychologists are going to be seeing this presentation, because who else cares about it? So, yeah, I know that the VA is using it. I know it's got some really good predictive value, and I know that I'm going to be using it my bad self if I have anyone feigning or exaggerating PTSD symptoms. And as far as I know, it might be one of the only symptom validity tests out there. But the MMPI-2, someone was asking about. Yes, the MMPI-2 has a number of really good scales that look at possible exaggeration of symptoms. And I've listed them here for your reference. You know, they're certainly the cutoff scores, and you can look at the Butcher book or the Essentials book or whatnot, because certainly different cutoffs suggest possible psychopathology above said cutoff. It could be exaggerated symptoms, but these are the different scales. We've got the L scale, which is failure to disclose problems, defensiveness, not necessarily lying. There's the K, the F, which is more and more in the research being found to be something that's good for detecting PTSD malingering, but it's not specifically a test for that. It just has a scale that looks at that, so that's the difference. But if you use the MENT test, the Morel emotional numbing test, and the MMPI, and you have the elevations on the MMPI on the F scale, especially if it's showing a lot of somatic complaints and all of those other good things, and then you've got the MENT, then you know you might have a case for someone who's malingering PTSD symptoms. It's got some different new scales. The FP scale is one of the new scales. It's good for coached and uncoached malingerers for feigned psychopathology. So someone who might have been coached to say that, yes, you have psychopathology, you have psychosis, the FP scale identifies that. One of the scales that I really like is the FBS. That's the one that's been identified for use in personal injuries cases, especially for someone who's saying that they have physical ailments due to an accident or whatnot. The FBS looks at that. And then, of course, the dissimulation scale, back to dissimulation. It says that it's a better scale for detecting malingers. That's one of the newer ones. And then, of course, we all know about the Vrin and Train. They aren't robust just yet. They are in their earliest stages, and they are being studied. However, you wouldn't rely on them alone anyway. You would give the MMPI if you had an elevation on that scale and you already had suspected that the person is malingering psychosis. Do the NFAS, do the SIMS, do the SERBs. You know, if you're suspecting that they're talking about problems with personal injury or physical pain, you're going to be looking at behavioral observations, collateral information. If you're suspecting that they're feigning PTSD symptoms, use the Morel. You know, you're going to be looking at different tests and never relying on one scale, especially a very young scale, on one test. So this is what they're saying that they're good for, but you're right, there's only been few studies on them and they are just recently developed. How many of you are familiar with the MMPI-2RF? Restructured forms? I like it. I like it a lot, actually. If you're interested in it, Pearson actually has a great webinar that's free online that you can go to and learn about it. It's based on the MMPI-2, but it's shorter than the MMPI-2. And therefore, it takes a lot less time to administer, but it's made of the same questions. And what they've done is some psychometric statistical magic to base it on the same norms. So what they've done is they've taken out a lot of the questions that were on the 5 scale and were confusingly written to cut it down. They've non-gender normed it, so it no longer has scale 5, but it does have all of the other basic scales, and it's based on the restructured forms. So you've got your VRIN, you've got your TRIN, you've got all of the other scales for infrequent responses, and then you've got the psychopathology and somatic and symptom validity scales. So it's got specific scales as well. But it's a lot shorter, and we brought this up in the Daubert, would it meet the Daubert challenge because it's new, and all of the research that I made my grad students do said yes. That it would meet Daubert because it's based on the original MMPI-2 norms. So it hasn't been changed much. And then, of course, we've got the PAI. Newest research for the Milan, the MCMI, is showing that their validity scales not so good for people with malingering. Over-pathologizes and everything else. So don't use the MCMI necessarily if you're looking specifically for malingering. You could look at it for other things like access to stuff, so definitely tell you some information about someone's antisocial personality disorder or proneness for alcohol and whatnot. But in general, I actually don't like the MCMI very much. The PAI, however, Personality Assessment Inventory, is a bear-to-hand score. I don't know how many of you use this test, but it gives you a lot of really good information, and they do have computerized scoring out there. And it does have, specifically, a malingering scale. Also has a Rogers scale. I'm going to put my information about that. Anytime I have an elevated scale in the MMPI or the PAI, that makes me think, wow, is this guy exaggerating or feigning any kind of symptoms? I might bring in another test that's specifically looking at malingered symptoms. Yeah, in fact, I would combine it together. I would say usually in my reports, I have symptom validity tests as an actual header right under test results as the first thing I start with. And then I talk about all of the symptom validity tests that I gave, including behavioral observations about their inconsistent effort on tests, or the differentiations between scores on tests, or their elevations on these tests that have built-in validity scales. So I put that all together. And that might just be all I say. I might say, due to his performance on all of these tests, the scores for the WACE and whatnot are not going to be discussed because the validity isn't there. But by that point, I probably wouldn't have given the full WACE anyway. I probably would have just stopped because the first thing I start off with after the clinical interview, unless they're super defensive, are my symptom validity tests. And if all of my symptom validity tests tell me don't bother going any further, I don't. What it comes down to is what is secondary gain? What is the secondary gain? Can you identify it? If not, then think about the fictitious disorder, conversion disorder, whatnot. If you can, then you might have malingering. What does your collateral information say? Does it support what you're finding? What inconsistencies have you noted across the entire triad? And what does your testing say to support your hypothesis? Is what you're finding supporting what you believe? If not, then start.